Good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. I am Mark McDonald. I'm the president and CEO of the Georgia Trust for Historic Preservation. And we're so glad you're all here to talk about an issue that is important to historic preservation, not just for African-American historic resources, but for many historic preservation challenges that we encounter in our work. We've got a really great lineup of speakers today who've got, I think, some really important information for you. But before I introduce them, I'd just like to thank a couple of people who've really made this possible. The Georgia African American Historic Preservation Network, otherwise known as GAPN. Its executive director, Melissa Jest, is on the call this morning. And the 1772 Foundation, which has generously supported really work all over the country, but has been a really special supporter of the Georgia Trust and our efforts through our revolving fund and through this effort to promote historic preservation resources from the African American community. So as I said, we've got really some excellent speakers. Melissa Jest, who I already spoke about, is going to share with us some information. Then we have two representatives from the Georgia Heirs Property Law Center, who's really doing some outstanding work in our state. Delene Porter, who is the Chief Operating Officer. Tiffany Reed is the Program and Grants Coordinator. They're going to start off our session today. LeJuano Varnell, Executive Director of Sweet Auburn Works, which is, if you don't know, which is the revitalization organization working in the Sweet Auburn district. Very important part of downtown Atlanta. And of course, I'll be speaking later on along with Ben Sutton, our Director of Preservation. So we're really glad to have all of you and your participation. And we certainly will answer your questions. Ben says to put them in the chat box. That's I think the most effective way to do it. But without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Melissa Jest and let her say a few words this morning. Melissa?
Good morning, and thank you so much, Mark. Thank you to you and your wonderful staff for this educational program that has grown and evolved over the years. I remember you mentioning this to me a couple of years ago, and so we're so happy to see it come to fruition. And greetings to everyone who is here on the call. I'm not going to belabor the point because I know you want to get down to it. It's an important topic, ownership, and also the diverse opportunities on our main streets and commercial corridors. So I just want to say on behalf of the Georgia Historic Preservation Division, we're your state preservation office. I just want to say again, thank you for your concern and all the efforts that you make on the ground in your communities to save, promote, and protect African American resources that tell a broad story of Georgia and how it came to be. And then also want to bring you welcome from the Georgia African American Historic Preservation Network, GAPN. GAPN is an advisory network that helps the state office kind of do a better job of knowing what African American resources are on the ground and in what condition they're in, and also being a partner in getting information out on how to save and promote and preserve and protect those resources. And so I want to encourage all of you to consider yourselves part of GAPN, to consider yourselves a part of this network. And I want to encourage you to feel free to touch bases with the State Preservation Office on resources that you know of that need information, or the stewards, I should say, of those resources that need information on how to protect and preserve those spaces. So again, my name is Melissa Jest. I am with the State Preservation Division, and we are under the Department of Community Affairs. So feel free to Google me, or I'm sure the Georgia Trust staff can share my information with you to send me any messages or let me know of resources out there. So again, have a wonderful workshop. Thank you so much, Mark, Ben, Danielle, all of the wonderful folks that'll be presenting today for what you're doing to bring this important information to folks on the ground. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Melissa, thank you so much. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you are actively looking for more participation on your board level. Isn't that correct? So people who may be interested in really stepping up their activities, you can let Melissa or me know, and we will see that you get some attention there. Okay.
Thank you so much. We are looking for volunteer board members.
Okay. So our first speaker is Delene Porter, the Chief Operating Officer of the Georgia Heirs Property Law Center. Delene?
Yes, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Ben and Danielle and Melissa. We are really excited to be part of this this morning. So Tiffany is in the process of loading the PowerPoint presentation up so that we can go through our slides. Really quickly, so Tiffany is on, and she and I will be doing the presentation, but we also have Wanda Strickland here, who is one of the center's amazing staff attorneys. And so she'll be sort of behind the scenes if we run into any sticky questions that we need some help with. So again, welcome. We're excited to talk with y'all about protecting history and building generational wealth, and really specifically doing this through preventing heirs property through estate planning. Sorry, next slide, Tiffany. So of course, you know, as a law firm, even though we're a 501c3 law firm, we have to start with a disclaimer that the information contained in the presentation is not direct legal services. And so we can't comment directly on any specific legal matters that you might have questions about, but this is for educational purposes. And we do want to give you a lot of information and hope that you will reach out to the center if you feel like you need to follow up with us. So I'm going to turn it back over to Tiffany to talk about the roadmap and introduce the center a little more.
All right, thanks, Delene, and thanks again to Mark and Ben and Danielle and Melissa for having us. I'm really excited to talk with y'all today. Here's our roadmap. We're going to start with a brief introduction. Then we're going to start talking about how heirs property impacts Georgia communities. And then we're going to talk about how we can address heirs property. And then we'll just leave it open for any questions at the end when we wrap up. Here's our mission. Our mission is to build generational wealth, economic value, and community stability by securing and preserving property rights. We consist of 4 attorneys, a paralegal, and 2 social workers, as well as a network of pro bono volunteers and grassroots organizational partners. We do statewide work, but we have a geographic focus and outreach in Atlanta and South Georgia. Our offices are in Atlanta, Athens, Fitzgerald, and Valdosta. Here's our team. As I said, we're a small team, but we are a mighty team of 4 attorneys, 2 social workers, and a paralegal. And I'm being joined today with Delene and Wanda. So what does the center do? Our work falls into 3 buckets. So in our first bucket, we provide legal support. We provide this support for families, individuals, nonprofits, and local governments. We do this through title audits, title clearing, and remediation of fractured title. We'll go into more detail a little bit later, but we also do title consolidation. That's if folks want to put it in an LLC or a trust. Our second bucket is what we call land loss prevention services, but in the legal world, you'll just hear this referred to as estate planning. So we do help individuals with estate planning. These services help slow down land loss and secure property assets through legal counseling and the development of estate plans. We also work with attorneys to make sure they're not creating heirs property through their wills, which can be kind of easy and often done. Sometimes, we'll hear of a family, the matriarch or the patriarch doesn't want to hurt anyone. So they say, well, I'll just split my land or my home evenly amongst all 4 of my kids. Well, even though that's creating a will, they still are creating heirs property. Our third bucket focuses on asset education. We do this through outreach and educating community members like we are today and other stakeholders about heirs property. We also educate landowners and about ways that they can increase the value of their property and generational wealth. So for example, talking with forest landowners about ways that they can grow their assets and not diminish it. This May, so we are right at the edge of 7 years. The center has been open. And during that time, we have provided legal services and closed 509 matters. 196 of those were title clearing, 128 were title search and audits, and 185 estate planning matters. We reviewed titles for 325 tracts of land that collectively valued at $22.33 million. We've also delivered 337 community outreach programs in 48 counties, and those outreaches have reached over 13,000 individuals. The center currently has 84 open title clearing and estate planning matters open in 24 counties, with a total tax assessed value of $5.99 million. Here we are on the map. So the yellow stars are where our offices are. The red counties are where our heirs property cases are or have been in the past. And you can see the pinkish shade, that's where our geographical target areas are. So how prevalent is heirs property in Georgia and who all does this impact? Well, there was a 2017 USDA and UGA Carl Vinson study that determined 11 to 25% of all parcels in every Georgia county are probable heirs property. So when you do the math, that means that the probable heirs property in Georgia has a tax appraised value of more than $34 billion. Heirs property is created every day as owners die without wills or they don't engage in thoughtful estate planning. And who does that impact? It really impacts everyone. It impacts the legal community, local governments, state and federal agencies, nonprofits, researchers, and even the private sector like local banks and local businesses. And we all share a common goal here. We all want a strong economy. We want to end blight. We want thriving families and vibrant communities. And here's some information about our average client. We work with nonprofits and local governments to combat blight. And like we said before, we do this through title audits, title clearing, and early intervention services. We do provide our services on a pro bono basis, but we also provide a discounted sliding fee scale, just depending on the household size and their income. In the past 12 months alone, the center has been contacted by 400 applicants seeking title clearing assistance. Our average client is 66 years old with an annual household income of just a little under $30,000 with property with a tax assessed value of $74,000. And I think,
Okay.
Yeah, I'm passing it back to Lynn.
Great. Thank you, Tiffany. So we've talked a lot about heirs property. Let's talk a little bit about what heirs property is exactly. So heirs property is a home or land that has passed from generation to generation in such a way that now multiple family members and relatives have an ownership interest in that property. Typically, the deed that is recorded at the courthouse is titled in the name of a deceased relative. So sometimes it's referred to as grandpa's land or, fractured title, tangled title, clouded title. And essentially, it happens, as Tiffany mentioned, when someone passes away with a will that names multiple beneficiaries as the owners or without a will. Then the state of Georgia has a law of intestate succession that determines who has an ownership interest. So let's go through a couple of examples that you guys, not to scare you this early in the morning, but I want you to sort of understand how heirs property works. So in this first example, mom owns the home, it's in her name, and then she passes away without a will. So she's now turned into a ghost. And that leaves, she's survived by dad and 4 kids, Anne, Bill, Carl, and Diane. So now the real property is co-owned by 5 heirs collectively. Some people in their mind think, oh, mom has passed away, the property automatically transfers to dad. Not necessarily. So let's get even more complicated. So Anne and Bill, two of the kids, pass away before mom dies. So they both pass away without wills. Mom dies without a will. Now she is survived by dad, Carl, and Diane. Anne's share goes to her three children, so Annie, Alice, and Andy. And Bill's share goes to his child, Ben. Now the property is co-owned by 7 people. In this next example, Carl passes away without a will, and his share goes to his spouse, Kathy. So you've got all these people passed away. Carl's now passed away, and now Kathy has an ownership interest. Then Diane dies without a will, and her share goes to her spouse and children. So now the property is co-owned by 9 heirs. Okay, example 2.2. Carl's wife, Kathy, remarries a guy named Earl. Then Kathy dies without a will. So her share, which she inherited from Carl, goes to Earl, who's like totally not even related to this family. Then Earl dies without a will, and his share, which he inherited from Kathy, goes to his children, maybe from a previous relationship. So the real property is now co-owned by 10 heirs, including in-laws and essentially non-family members. Okay, example 2.3. It turns out that dad had a child, Gail, outside of his marriage. So he has a love child, and dad also dies without a will. So dad was predeceased by Anne, Bill, mom, Carl, and Diane, which means that dad's share goes to Anne's 3 children, Bill's child, Diane's children, and Gail. The real property is now co-owned by 7 heirs, dad's 7 heirs and mom's 9 heirs. And, in families, we understand family dynamics. Sometimes the heirs don't even realize that there was another child from another relationship. So obviously it's complicated. Let's talk a little bit about how heirs property erodes homes, land, and generational wealth building. Because we're really talking about not just historic preservation, but really, family wealth, community wealth. So what does it mean to own heirs property? This is usually the slide where everybody spits out their coffee and has a total freak out, but it's going to be okay. So heirs property, technically the owners of heirs property are referred to as tenants in common. This means that each heir has equal rights to full use and possession of that property. So technically, someone who's been living in the house, mom said it was going to be hers when mom passed away. She's been living there for 30 years, paying the property taxes. The tax bill comes in her name. Technically, she's not really allowed to bar her brother from coming into the home, because technically he is also potentially an heir with a legal right to be there. Each heir is legally responsible for the taxes and other property related expenses. We know that oftentimes, potentially in the example I just gave where the woman has been paying the taxes, she didn't even know that other people were supposed to be equally contributing. Or what often happens is there's a fight around, October every year when that tax bill comes in, who's going to contribute. Technically, everyone is supposed to, chip in equally. Each heir may transfer their interest in the property to another heir or to an outsider. So, transferring interest to another heir is part of how the center, one of the legal tools the center uses to help a family clean up that title. But we often run into situations where long lost heir who may not have ever even been to the home or the land has been approached by a developer who has offered them cash to, say, buy their ownership interest in this property that they don't care about, don't know anything about. And now all of a sudden the family literally co-owns this property with someone who might not have the interests of the family and their goals at heart. So each heir may seek a partition of the property. So one heir can, tell all the others, I want to sell this property and take my portion of the proceeds. And each heir must agree to any major decisions about the property. And the center often gets involved with this one when, let's say, Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Michael, a tornado comes through, just not even a tornado, just a tree has fallen on the roof, and the person or family living in the home tries to go to a home repair program, like a community development block grant program or disaster rehab and repair program, and they get told, you don't technically own this property, therefore you can't qualify to be in our program. So it's a very vulnerable way of owning property to have it be as heirs property. So next slide. Why is heirs property a problem? Well, you might not be able to participate in government programs, those offered by USDA, HUD, FEMA, those disaster programs. The HUD has, other housing options. And then of course, USDA has things like EQIP, all of the loans to help you do good things with your agricultural property. Heirs can't sell, mortgage, or lease heirs property without agreement of all of the heirs. They can't negotiate with insurance companies. We've had that occur. They really do face an increased risk of forced sale and eviction, difficulty farming, qualifying for ag loans and selling those agricultural products. They can't qualify for most of those rehab and financing programs. It's really difficult if a spouse has passed away to deal with a mortgage company. We've had to step in and help folks in that situation negotiate to modify the loans. And then of course, this actually is one of the ways a lot of people find out they're in heirs property is they go to their tax office to qualify for homestead exemption or other tax breaks, and they find out that they can't actually qualify until they get all of the heirs on board. So why is heirs property a problem? Again, it increases the likelihood for family disputes and discord. We've seen it time and again. Otherwise totally rational family members end up, lashing out and permanently damaging family relationships. There's the potential of losing that connection to family history and community, which I know this audience is extremely attuned to. And then that loss of sense of independence associated with ownership. So when you do have clear title, it opens the gates to that generational wealth building that is really important. So, if you have that clear title, you can go to a bank and open a line of credit or take out a mortgage to fix things. You can use that loan. You can use your home as collateral for a loan for small business startup, sending kids to college. You can generate income. You can lease out your home. We've had folks do Airbnb for the first time and have to pay income taxes. You can hunt the land, lease the land for hunting or sell farm products, forest products. You can sell the property and you can pass that property on to the next generation if you do it properly. So heirs property is a problem. Clear title is the solution. So the center does a lot of work at the community level, not just at the individual level, because we find that heirs property really negatively impacts the functioning of communities. So oftentimes heirs property ends up becoming abandoned and becomes blighted. It's not that the folks didn't want to keep the house up, it's just once that roof starts to leak and they can't qualify for any of the repair programs, all of a sudden the home deteriorates, they can no longer live there, they have to move out, usually putting pressure on the affordable housing rental market, and the home continues to fall apart. Of course, this becomes a nightmare for code enforcement officers and the folks who are trying to collect property taxes. It's a contributing factor to the decrease in owner-occupied homes in a neighborhood and family-owned farms. Of course, Heirs property hinders the efforts to increase and stabilize affordable housing in a community, and then communities often lose revitalization funding, because when you draw down those block grant dollars, you really need to have clear title to do the work on a home. Of particular interest to the center and to Georgia, Heirs property really impacts disaster recovery and resilience. So obviously homes and buildings can't qualify for those reconstruction programs and buyout programs if it happens to be in a flood zone and there's money available to help families relocate. You can't sell your property to relocate if you don't truly have ownership control. A large percentage of homeowners with title issues means that a community can't fully access the funds that are coming down for them. And it just messes up revitalization efforts in general. So here's an example of one of these homes that the center worked on. We've changed the client's names, but in this example, Miss Parrott's home became uninhabitable from Hurricane Irma. And then, the title to her home was in her deceased husband's name. And because she and her husband had daughters, they had all inherited the property together. So the center had to work with those daughters to sign over their interest to their mothers so that we could consolidate the title into just one person's name, which then unlocked her access to the home repair program that's being run by the Department of Community Affairs. So really quickly, I want to go through some myths and facts about Heirs property. There is a myth that Heirs property is only found in one part of Georgia. The fact is, it's all across Georgia. So I'm extremely excited that the attendees are from all over Georgia for this meeting. So Heirs property, it's not just a rural issue. It's not just an urban issue. It's not just a coastal Georgia issue. It's not just a, Southwest Georgia or North Georgia issue. It's all over. Think back to that 11 to 25% of the parcels in any given county is probable Heirs property. So then the idea is that Heirs property, that's just the problem of the people who live in it or who, are dealing with it. But in fact, we see, that $34 billion in tax appraised property that is essentially frozen equity is a drain on the entire community and state's economy. And then the idea that Heirs property is a family problem and that they should deal with it all on their own. The reality is it takes a wide set of skills to clean up Heirs property. You do have to have an attorney involved to actually clean it up. And that this really is something that our communities need to be actively engaged in. So access, sale, and eviction. Sometimes we hear the idea that keeping it as heirs property somehow protects it and prevents it from being sold. It's sort of like, if you scatter out the ownership interest, it would make it much harder to have it sold out from under the family. But really, the more powerful tool is having that consolidated marketable title so that you can manage it for the heirs rather than who knows which heir is going to sell their interest to an outsider. Again, that myth that an heir cannot sell his or her interest in the property without the consent of the other heirs. They can do that whether or not the other heirs even know, or they might not even know the other heirs. And then, an heir can change the locks or restrict other heirs' access to the property. Technically, no, because again, think of tenants in common. Each heir has, rights to equal access and use of the property. Property taxes and tax sales are another area of lots of myths, and we have these available on our website as well that you can download. But there's, the idea that if one of the heirs pays the property taxes, somehow they have a greater ownership interest in the real property than the non-paying heirs, and that's unfortunately not true. Paying current or back taxes does not increase your legal ownership. Title problems can be cleared by letting heirs' property go to a tax sale. This is a huge myth that everybody thinks is true, but if the property has gone to tax sale and it's a non-judicial tax sale, which most tax sales are, because judicial NREM, taking it through, the local county's court system, most counties don't bother. It's too costly to do that. So it just goes, for sale on the courthouse steps. If you purchase that title on the courthouse steps, you as the winning bidder still have to wait a 12-month period for redemption, like other heirs coming forward. And then you still have to hire an attorney to clear the title, because in essence, you have bought a title that is still a tangled title. Just because it went for tax sale does not mean that the title has been cleared. So I'm going to turn, oh wait, no, I'm going to keep going. All right, working with the center, unlocking generational wealth. So how does the center work with individuals? Specifically, we work with them on figuring out, first of all, what their goals are for the property, and then trying to figure out how to get that title consolidated. And that could mean through, we have several different legal avenues, probating deceased relatives' estates, that goes through the probate court. Obviously, if you need to do some sort of quiet title action or partition action, those might go through, some of those might go through the Superior Court. Preparing affidavits of descent or other instruments. Our attorneys have a whole toolkit of resources that they use to really help that family get the title into a state that it can be used. And that could include, I think Tiffany mentioned this earlier, it could mean that rather than putting the title into one person's name, it's put into an LLC or a trust, especially if it's being managed for leasing out or selling timber or agricultural products. Those more business-like structures are very helpful. And again, we spend a lot of time just explaining this is sort of a time-consuming process. It can be very expensive, but this is the only thing that truly empowers the family and unlocks that equity for the family. So when you work with the center, one of the first things we're going to do is find out what the deed says. Is the deed that's recorded at the courthouse in a living person's name, or is it in a deceased person's name? And then from there, if it's in a deceased person's name, who has an ownership interest? So we work to identify those heirs and figure out the shares, like what their ownership interest is percentage-wise. And then we figure out a legal strategy. Is it going to be probate court? Is it going to be corrective deeds, litigation, then leading to consolidation? And then we spend a lot of time talking with clients about estate planning, which I'll talk about in a moment. But first I want to show, there's actually in the middle on the right, you can see Wanda, the staff attorney who's on the call with us. So this is one of those community development block grant home rehab programs that requires clear title. And this was one of our clients who, her home was in really bad shape, and the community really wanted to make her whole. And actually the home was in such bad shape that once the center finally got the title consolidated into her name, the community actually tore down her existing house and rebuilt a new home for her. And it's interesting because in that process of figuring out who had an ownership interest and what was happening, she met some family members that she didn't realize that she had. So yeah, she was an interesting one because we actually set some case law. She was essentially, she went to live with her aunt and uncle when she was very young, and she was raised believing that she was her aunt and uncle's biological child, and didn't figure out that she wasn't until she went to get a driver's license and had, her aunt and uncle, her mom and dad had to provide a birth certificate. So it was a situation where we were able to get her virtually adopted, legally on the books, but a process that happened after her parents had already passed away. Okay, preventing heirs property, estate planning. So this is a wonderful mitigation an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. This is the way to go. So an estate planning process helps an individual or couple anticipate and plan for what will happen to you and your assets when you die or become incapacitated. So you're going to end up answering questions about, who will hold title to that real property, who will inherit your assets, who will make healthcare decisions for you if you are unable to make healthcare decisions for yourself. That is part of this process, and who will manage your assets if you become incapacitated. So the complete estate plan, which the center does, includes the advance directive for healthcare. This is one of those ones where it's a document that helps lay out what treatment options you want if you are unable to tell somebody who and what you want done. Financial power of attorney, you can designate that the healthcare directive person and the financial power of attorney person are the same person, but they might be different people. And the financial power of attorney is somebody who watches after your financials if you become incapacitated. And then the last will and testament. This is the critical piece. Within the last will and testament, there you can also name guardians and conservators. So if you are a parent of young children, or you are caring for a disabled adult, being able to designate who you would like to have be the guardian of those children or take care of the incapacitated adult, that's critical. And it also allows you to set up a trust, which might manage all of your assets or other real property. So what happens when somebody dies with a will? Well, with a will, you're considered to have died testate. And if you die testate, you have decided who inherits your estate, who becomes the executor of your estate. So the person who you have appointed to figure out, the business of, parceling out your assets. You've decided who becomes the guardian of your minor children or an incapacitated adult that you care for. If you leave your property to more than one person, it becomes heirs property. So we spend a lot of time working with folks, if there are ways to benefit all of your children that don't involve just saying, I leave my home to all my kids. There are ways that can be written into the will that we encourage, so that there is sort of like an escape plan. Like maybe one kid doesn't want ownership interest in the house, and then they could be bought out by the other kid. And then the will must go through a probate court process to have an effect. So, we did a presentation with a woman who was holding on to the will of her deceased husband. And she was like, well, I have the will at home. Doesn't that mean I own the house? And we were like, no, even though your husband passed away 20 years ago, it has to be filed with the probate court to actually transfer that title, the process of transferring the title into your name. So what happens when somebody dies without a will? If you die without a last will and testament, with those instructions laid out, you are considered to have died intestate. So when somebody dies intestate, the heirs are determined according to a hierarchy that is established by Georgia law. So, if you don't have your own last will and testament, the state of Georgia has one for you. And in this situation, a probate judge chooses who's going to administer this estate, and the probate judge ultimately determines who becomes the guardian of minor children or the conservator for incapacitated adults. So obviously, dying intestate is a problem for multiple reasons. You end up with Georgia deciding who inherits your assets. Your assets are divided equally without regard for whether an heir wants or needs those assets. Think about those previous diagrams with all those people ending up co-owning the property, even, new spouses with, kids that aren't even really related to the family. Intestate succession creates an increased risk, obviously, for family discord, and the real property is inherited by more than one person, which is heirs property. So how can heirs property be prevented? If you and a partner, you and your spouse or partner own the property together, the deed can be written so that it shows it as joint tenants with right of survivorship. So if one of you passes away, the ownership does fully go to the partner or spouse. But again, this is a stopgap measure because then the partner or spouse needs to have done a last will and testament. And you could leave the property to a single beneficiary. You can instruct the executor to sell that property and divide the proceeds. You could give family members options to purchase the property, from one another, or it could be divided among the beneficiaries, especially if it's a large tract of land, but you have to lay out how it should be divided. And then of course you could place the property in an LLC or a trust, and you can do that before you pass away. That can be set up beforehand. So the other thing that we really, really like to tell people about estate planning is about safeguarding their documents. So once you've done this last will and testament, once you've done this, healthcare, advanced directive for healthcare, or this financial power of attorney, it's critical that the documents be stored in a safe and accessible place. So not necessarily your deposit box, because there's a chance people don't have access to your deposit box, and certainly not easily. The executor of your will should know where to find your will if you pass away. Do not write on your will. Don't cross things out or make changes. It could invalidate the entire will. So there are ways to update your will, last will and testament, with an attorney's help, but do not write on your will. So we obviously at the center talk a lot about estate planning and its value for individual family wealth building, but we also see it in that broader context of community wealth building. So it helps preserve subsidies, those nonprofits that have invested, philanthropic dollars in repairing a home or, fixing something up. It ensures that, if and when the occupant of that home passes away, it doesn't fall into disrepair because all the kids are fighting over what to do with it. It preserves affordable housing stock. There's nothing more affordable than the house that currently exists, that somebody currently lives in. Prevents blight, and then provides safe housing for minor children and incapacitated adults. Really, it provides that plan. So I'm going to turn it back over to Tiffany to talk about working with the center in that sort of community context.
Thanks, Celine. As Celine was saying, we do work with a lot of community organizations, nonprofits as well. And so here are some of the resources we have available for them. We have on the left the Georgia Estate Planning Handbook for Communities, as well as a disaster planning and heirs property handbook. As Celine was saying, a lot of times people find out that they have heirs property after some sort of natural disaster hits and they're trying to repair their homes or receive any kind of government funding towards the repair. And here's some other resources we have on our website. So like I said, we have the Georgia Estate Planning Handbook for Communities, the myths and facts that Jolene went over earlier. We have brochures about heirs property and disaster mitigation. And we also have all of our webinars available. If you just, if there's anything that you heard this morning that you wanted to hear again or just a review, we do have all of our previous webinars. We have our previous webinars on the website. The communities can contract with the center for any kind of educational outreach like we're doing today to assess the condition of titles, as well as provide title clearing and estate planning services as well. And we do ask that our work is copywritten. So if you do end up using anything on the website, we just ask that you give us a little shout out, and we would really appreciate it. And yeah, now we can leave it open for any questions. Here's our website, email, and phone number for anyone who would like it. And I'll leave the floor open.
Great. Thank you, Tiffany. So I think this slide pretty much answers one of the questions, which is just where your website is for folks to find these documents. So everything you just mentioned can be found on your website, correct?
Sure.
Yes.
And I do want to chime in and just let folks know that we are recording the workshop, and we will send it out to participants, and it'll be available for you to look at again for up to 2 weeks following the workshop. So if you missed something now, you'll be able to go back and reference it again.
Okay.
All right, so we have one question in the chat. What is abandoned property, or is there actually a legal definition of abandoned property?
That's interesting. I'm not sure that there is a legal definition of abandoned property. I think some of it comes down to, I'm sure each local government has something in their ordinances in terms of how long has it been unoccupied, how long has the electricity been cut off, how are the taxes being paid. From the standpoint of the center, there's always somebody with a legal tie to that property. So even if it happens to be unoccupied, there is the potential that it could be leveraged into, an asset that could be sold or turned over if they truly don't want the property anymore.
And I know from our experience that if a property is purchased at a tax sale, whoever purchases it at the tax sale is required to wait 12 months before they can do anything to give all of those folks who may have a claim to that title an opportunity to come back and stake their claim, I suppose. So that does provide, there are opportunities for folks who may have a claim to quote unquote abandoned property to make those claims. We had another question about your targeted areas and geographic areas, particularly around Sapelo Island. Are you all working there?
Yeah, we do work. We're currently working with sidecars Sapelo Island Cultural and Revitalization Society. We've done a series of workshops with them, most recently about heirs property and estate planning. And we're actually working on an estate planning project to help families who may or may not have heirs property on Sapelo Island, ensure that, they're able to pass their ownership interest on in the best way possible.
Well, I don't see any other questions, but folks, feel free to add them into the chat. We can always circle back as we need to. Oh, here's one. Hold on. Let's see. Somebody has a question about squatters' rights. Are there squatters' rights in Georgia? And does that tie into your all's work?
Oh, I don't actually, I can't speak to that. It would be a case-by-case basis. I do know that we had one case that it wasn't called squatters' rights. Oh, it was called something else.
Adverse possession?
Yes, well, yes, it was partly an adverse possession case, but it was interesting because the person had been there for years and thought they owned the property, and fortunately the rest of the family who did own the property also, they were like, you own the property, so we don't need to go to adverse possession. We're just going to sign the interests over to you. So we've dealt with some of that, but I'm sure we'll deal with more of it as we move forward, especially when you start looking at buildings in downtowns, things that, you would think would probably have been put in an LLC, but perhaps the LLC has been administratively dissolved. There's all kinds of tangled title issues, even with quote unquote commercial real estate.
Delina, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
When Melissa and I worked in Savannah together for 8 years, we worked a lot on inner city neighborhoods. We used quitclaim deeds a good bit to get potential heirs. We paid a small sum of money. They didn't know they owned the property. It had liabilities more than it was worth. And do you think that's an effective way of solving some of these issues, or are they unreliable?
No. I mean, sometimes that's an effective way. It depends on what the goal for the property is, and, again, helping the heirs understand that they do have an asset, and that asset comes with both, hopefully positives, but also responsibilities, and kind of, so yes, we do use quitclaims as one of our legal tools to help somebody get the title into their name. And I see one.
Yeah, one more question. Is the
Okay.
center able to help a family where the sale or transfer may have already occurred? For example, the owner dies but signed away the property when they were on hospice without a power of attorney being consulted.
Oh, that's a maybe. That's one of those
Okay.
ones where it's like possibly, or at least legally we could help explain what happened to the property and
Right.
help the family understand what happened.
I think your all's explanation was very helpful about how complex these things can get and how quickly they can get very complex. And each case is going to be a unique situation. Let's see. There's one more question about properties with liens on them. But I mean, essentially that's sort of the next level. From my perspective, that would be the next level issue after you've determined all of the ownership stakes.
We do deal with lien issues, especially if that's what, we figured out the title, and then there's a lien issue standing in the way of, our client participating in one of these home rehab programs. Sometimes we're able to help with that. There's all different kinds of liens from the state, liens from the IRS, liens related to water and trash pickup. So we try to do what we can. Most of our clients are not behind on their taxes. I think most people think, oh, heirs property, it's all tax delinquent, therefore we can use a land bank. But in most of our clients' cases, they have been paying the taxes. So they wouldn't even be on the radar of a land bank. And even if something does get sucked into a land bank, the land bank still has to clear the title. So sometimes land banks will reach out to the center to talk through that process and see if we can support them in that. So there's not really a magic wand, but there is a solution. It just takes some time.
Well, thank
you
you
all
all
so much.
so much. That was great. So we're now going to turn it over to LeJuano Varnell, the Executive Director of Sweet Auburn Works. LeJuano, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. What a smooth transition, Mark. I love that. Let me get myself sorted. I'm gonna get a drink of coffee, and I'm going to organize some slides for you guys and tell you a bit about what we do here at Sweet Auburn Works. Give me just this minute. Make sure I still know how to Zoom. Sharing my screen. Gotta go back to Zoom school. What's going on here? Okay, I think this is gonna do it. Okay. By a show of yay, someone confirmed to me that you can see the opening slide.
We can.
Outstanding. That is amazing that worked. All right, guys. Thanks so much. I truly appreciate it. Again, I'm LeJuano Varnell. I'm with Sweet Auburn Works. And we are a preservation-based economic development organization representing the Sweet Auburn Historic District. So for those of you who know, all around Georgia, we're a Main Street program. We're funny because the city of Atlanta in and of itself does not have a coordinating entity. So we're the only Main Street in Atlanta. We endeavored upon ourselves to go to Washington, D.C. and beg and plead to ensure that this historic African-American neighborhood had an intermediary organization to help bring new resources, so new capital, the new reintroduction of new people and culture into this neighborhood so that we can continue to thrive and grow. And, you know, we believe it's the right model, it's the right rubric. And those of you who've been to Thomasville, been to Valdosta, Albany know the success of the program and how good it works, how well it works. And despite that success, of course, you know, we're in the 7th largest city in the country. We're in a large urban area, and as a result, we work alongside closely the Urban Main program from the National Main Street Center, and those things that because of geographically where we are and what we deal with, they're just different challenges to work with. But we always go with our guiding light. Richard Moe, I think, said it so well. The preservation is in the business of saving communities and the values they embody. We think of ourselves more of cultural heritage preservationists alongside of physical historic preservationists. So, you know, as we're a National Historic Landmark District and a City of Atlanta designated landmark district, while the physical edifices are tantamount to ensuring that we stay who we are intrinsically as this legacy Black neighborhood, we desperately believe that what's also equally important is preserving the narratives, the people, the successes that came out of those physical buildings, to talk about, you know, how great the neighborhood was and how this was the birthplace of a Dr. Martin Luther King. as a mentor once said, that man didn't fall out of the sky. He was nurtured and cultured and raised in this neighborhood. And the idea is our organization endeavors to ensure you understand that story and understand the value and the history of this place. So let's get going. So that's what I got into early on. We are an affiliate Main Street program here in Atlanta. You're looking at the historic Oddfellows building. I'll refer to this building a lot. That was built, the two buildings were built in 1912 and 1913. You'll notice that we also have the streetcar going immediately through our historic district, for better or for worse, but it's a part of our revitalization. So what we do, goodness, what don't we do? But top right, I give a lot of tours, curating this neighborhood to tourists, to philanthropic investors, to private capital investors, to people who are interested in our narrative and assisting in helping us let that narrative grow. Speaking of that narrative and telling the story, top left, what you're looking at is some art that we commissioned that highlights, just 6 stalwart women of Sweet Auburn, including the granddaughter of the founder of the Atlanta Daily World newspaper, the first successful daily Black newspaper in the country. You'll see Geneva Hoggebrooks, who founded in 1937 Hoggebrooks Funeral Home with just some money she saved up from ironing and cleaning shirts and apparel. The top left is Ella, who when Dr. King was officing at Ella Baker, when he was officing at SCLC, she was the person on the ground running that organization in the early 1960s. Bottom left is an interior shot of the Prince Hall Masonic Lodge. That Masonic Lodge still stands today and is under renovation. We'll get into it in a case study later in this chat. But you see Alexis interviewing Ambassador Young for a piece for the Atlanta History Center. And in the bottom right, it's hard to tell with that terrible image, but that's a panel of the Commissioner of Transportation, Jennifer Fine from Invest Atlanta, Central Atlanta Progress, and one of our real estate developers. We cultivate a program called the Sweet Auburn Pre-Development Technical Assistance Fund. And what that does is it provides specialty services for real estate development to occur in our neighborhood on behalf of our legacy landowning stakeholders. And that's going to be really important. I'll tell you about it a little bit later in this talk. Also, we convene community meetings. We help with infrastructure. Our parklet, one of our 2 parklets you see, we offer opportunities for vending in our vacant lots, and we put in bike lanes because we, to this day, still have the highest commuter bicycle counts of any neighborhood in the city of Atlanta, more than 5,000 unique trips per month. South of Freedom Parkway, between downtown and the Beltline, and just north of Grant Park. So I mentioned what we do in general as an organization, but you have to understand that as a Main Street organization, that is an historic district, that is a National Historic Landmark district. One of our biggest roles is ensuring we coalesce the visions of our stakeholders, our residents, and our landowning stakeholders, who to this day we have more than 50% land and building ownership by nonprofit African-American organizations. In the most recent, in what we just saw just in this previous presentation, guys, I cannot stress to you enough how important it is for land ownership to be a guiding tool in charting the future of your neighborhood, the future of your community. It's how you maintain your tone and tenor. It's how you maintain your cultural ethos. It's how you ensure that your neighborhood grows on your terms. I'll tell you what happens in urban environments all over the country, and particularly in Atlanta, is that if a community is not in charge of its growth or not in charge of shepherding in new growth that comes into the area, oftentimes our history, our legacy, our heritage sort of gets run over with new development. We're so good in this city of just sort of raising something and bringing up anew, and forgetting the culture that used to be there. And one of the things that we attempt to do primarily at Sweet Auburn Works in this main street is to ensure that that does not happen to this community, because the legacy is so rich and so important to not just the city and the state, but we also think the nation. And as a result, we spend a lot of time speaking nationally to ensure that other communities like in Overtown in Miami, or Jackson Ward in Richmond, or the Ville in St. Louis, or even West Las Vegas in Las Vegas have the same tools and same methodologies in preserving their history and culture as well. So that's what I'm getting at in these 3 bullets. So what does that even look like, right? In practice, adaptive reuse of stalwart old buildings that represent our culture. In the top left corner, you see an image from the 19-teens, pre-depression, of the historic Oddfellows atrium that was built in 1913. You'll see the second iteration of a drugstore that used to be Gate City Drugs. It's now Yates. In this image, it's now Yates and Milton, and it's how the facade looked. If you move down on the left, you'll see the same facade in the 70s. Top right is essentially today. And in the bottom right, it's how we envision faithfully, preserving the building, just, a more polished image for the future. And that's our goal, is to ensure that our property owners can steadily transition and continue their properties, and continue to have them be contributing members of contributing structures of this neighborhood that can house entrepreneurship, can house community benefit, cannot turn their backs on the streets, and also be, tax-paying members of the city. How do we do that? Advocacy, 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 advocacy. And well, this is one of them. Many of you know that one of the few municipal redevelopment tools that exist in the state is our tax allocation district program. And we're lucky enough to have a tax allocation district. It's called the Eastside TAD, administered by Invest Atlanta. It was launched, I believe, in just 2003, and it's been collecting increment ever since to ensure that we have the ability to address vacant parcels, blight, challenging development like historic preservation. We use the language of highest and best use very funny in this neighborhood. When our concept of highest and best use does not always fit market rate highest and best use. And so our highest and best use has to do with affordable housing, even affordable commercial, and using some of our vacant parcels for green space and not necessarily for capital accumulation. And so this is a great tool that we're using to help solve that. What you're looking at is an image from 2018, when the executive office of the city of Atlanta was attempting to take our accumulated increment out of the TAD and use it for other purposes to fill budget gaps. And we were advocating to save it, obviously. As a result of that, the aforementioned Sweet Auburn Pre-Development and Technical Assistance Program that we helped create with Central Atlanta Progress and Invest Atlanta to provide much needed professional service like feasibility studies, historic preservation consultation, architectural design, all those things, that would be normally straightforward and just a course of doing business for professional real estate developers. When you're working with churches and nonprofits who own a lot of our land, they don't have readily available the cash to pay for this, nor a lot of the purview oftentimes to be able to seek that kind of wisdom. It's a recurring theme throughout all environments, in my opinion, in urban America that have had just retreated expertise and retreated capital. We all understand what happened in in the 60s, 70s, and 80s with the exodus of folks from the urban core. And what we're trying to do is sort of bridge that gap. As an intermediary, we try and bridge that gap with expertise. We try and bridge that gap with capital. We try and bridge that gap with networking folks to ensure they have the skills they need to continually revitalize. And this is just one of those plans and options. So what does that look like in real terms? We are, I have created a program that allows us to partner with, on the design side. Well, first, let me back up. Because of how I believe problems get solved in real life, in real space, I think design has a strong role in complementing a lot of the work we do to solve problems in this neighborhood. And we believe that design, specifically in public space, streetscape, facade, building refurbishment, is very valuable and is a skill set that we need to culture and share with our stakeholders in the neighborhood. And so we look at parcels individually, look at vacant lots, we look at old buildings, and we try and figure out ways to make them more amenable to the streetscape, make them more helpful to the business owners that choose to stay in our retail or that choose to try and operate in this neighborhood. We want to be able to leverage tourism that comes to the neighborhood, be able to benefit from the agglomeration of other businesses. We have a good number of restaurants, on one side of the neighborhood. We sit just between downtown and the Beltline, and the idea is how do you use what we have to make it better? And so we collaborate with a lot of design institutions. So for example, I have this building that's owned by Wheat Street in a design program with Savannah College of Art and Design in partnership with Gensler to rethink, this non-historic building by Wheat Street is built in 1972 to help reimagine the facade of it and be able to benefit from the East Side, the Invest Atlanta East Side TAD facade improvement program. That's one quick option. Now I haven't spoken about interior design, but this is just as important. You're looking at this woman on the top of your screen, Chef Sonia Jones. She's been in the Sweet Auburn community for 25 years. She owns Sweet Auburn Bread Company. She is Bill Clinton's favorite cheesecake to this day, and she's got national press as such. She's a caterer to Tyler Perry, and she works out of 500 square feet in this production kitchen that looks like this, right? And I thought to myself, as we begin to curate and cultivate what the neighborhood should look like, we wanted to begin to start one storefront at a time, one business at a time, and provide some consultative assistance. So what you're seeing on the bottom is a consultative engagement with Chef Sonia and a SCAD-Serve consulting team. That SCAD-Serve consulting team came up with renderings to refresh that interior, give Chef Sonia just a different purview on how she sees her working space and how customers will interact with her, and still keep an African-American entrepreneur in the neighborhood and be able to benefit from its growth and do it in a very attractive and I think customer-friendly way. So this is another type of thing that we do with our business and property owners. For businesses that are, for buildings that are not quite in full development queue, fun things like this. I've been working with Denise in Atlanta, the construction firm, to help me with some unattractive facades. Everybody has a hard time with mothballing. It's expensive. It's challenging. You've got people who tag anything. If you've got a can of spray paint, apparently it's your God-given right to write something you feel strongly about on someone else's building. But one of the things we try and do is be smart with a little bit of capital about how to make our buildings not look like a target and also not turn their backs on the street. And so this is one in-process renovation of 229 Auburn Avenue, which used to be the Atlanta Life Insurance branch office. It also housed an old accountancy firm from the first Black accountant in the city of Atlanta, Black CPA, and a dance studio on the second floor. And the idea is, how can we use things like vinyl and aluminum to give a reimagined facade, while it's waiting for redevelopment on behalf of the Butler Street CDC. So these are fun projects we try and do. The Historic District Development Corporation in our neighborhood owns the Atlanta Life Insurance building. And, in addition to trying to keep it tidy and keep some of the facade cleaned and refreshed with a couple of coats of paint, we thought it'd also be fun to commission Amal Yomaki to reimagine the windows, and adorn this fenestration with old executives of the old Atlanta Life Insurance building. And that was a fun project that we had. And eventually the public maybe put a legend on the front so they know who folks are. It's funny, I forget that not everyone knows the history of the 100+ years of really amazing executives that came through that organization, not the least of which the founder, Alonzo Herndon, who you see at the bottom, on the right picture at the bottom right window. And then opposite him on the bottom left, his son. So these are some of the fun things we do while mothballing, while buildings are, being sort of challenged to find capital to get into the development queue, as we work them through our pre-development technical assistance fund to get them in line for Eastside TAD assistance. Now this one was absolutely fun. What you're looking at is the water tower for the Studioplex development on the Beltline. Studioplex is a 300,000 square foot historic cotton and baling facility that took advantage of the Beltline, the Atlanta and West Railroad, and its access to get goods out of this commercial area. So that water tower was a 1906 constructed sprinkler system for that 300,000 square foot facility. Just at the top, you'll see there's a 100,000 gallon water tank in there that, if you look on the side, there's a ladder that takes you up to the top. 1906, they filled that thing up one bucket at a time, guys. And now that we've kept it standing, through the good graces of Easement Atlanta, we have a facade easement on it. You'll see in that picture someone tagged it. I have to clean graffiti off that thing all the time. But on the interior, we wanted to do something really fun. And we hired Charmaine Minifield to do a 100-foot linear mural around the interior of that water tower. So you guys do the math for those of you who are so inclined. It's 35 feet in diameter. And I want to say that thing's 126 feet circular. It's unbelievable. And the scale is amazing. It's about 15 feet tall and that around. And the image inside, you can't do it, with a camera, but it's a ring shout. It's an old African-American ring shout, young African-American women. It's absolutely gorgeous. And again, as we mothball and continue to think about how to use our historic building infrastructure, these are just some of the creative things we attempt to do. Now, for those of you who really want to get into the weeds, I've got a couple of case studies for you. You heard me previously mention the Prince Hall Masonic Lodge. Lots of cities have Prince Hall lodges. I was just at the one in Savannah a couple of weeks ago. Ours sits at the corner of Hilliard and Auburn. It was built by John Wesley Dobbs, its Grand Master, in 1937. And it was home to not just the Masons, but so many small businesses in the neighborhood. WERD was the first Black-owned radio station in North America. It sat on the second floor in the back, and was literally the voice of the African American community in Atlanta for some time. On the bottom left, you're looking at a Madam C.J. Walker beauty school. There was a beauty school on the second floor of the Masonic Lodge as well. That's not obviously the picture, but if you go today, you can still see the plumbing for the sinks. And you heard me mention before that it is also the offices of, it had previously been the office of the SCLC, the founding office, and housed Dr. King's only office that he had professionally. That's important because in 2018, the late Representative John Lewis drafted some legislation that was eventually signed by Trump that allowed that building to be put to be a part of the National Historical Park in our neighborhood. So in addition to curating his life at the center itself and having his birth home that sits on Auburn Avenue just up the street, just 2 blocks over, you've got the space of his only office that's going to soon be renovated. And the National Park Service will have an exhibit on the first floor, reimagining his office and allowing tourists to sort of see where, you know, he began to birth this movement of civil rights. So with the help of Lord Ekin Sargent and with some faithful fundraisers, the Grand Lodge began to go on on a path to redevelop that old building, to get it up and going, to to fix the roof, to bring new businesses back into the building, and make it a contributing part of the neighborhood in a very meaningful way, as it once was before, you know, when it first got built in the 1930s. So everybody probably on this call knows who Jack Pyburn is at Lord Ekin Sargent, and Jack is leading this effort on the skill set side. You see the very technical work we're going to do in ADA accessibility and rehabilitating our old storefronts, and just making this building be the next generation of some new entrepreneurship that comes to the neighborhood, and also a place for tourists to land comfortably and enjoy and enjoy walking through the history and the legacy of this neighborhood. So the math. Now, for those of you with really keen eyes for numbers, I'll let you know that these are draft numbers. So don't take it all too seriously. The math is right. As you can imagine, we have a very diversified capital stack in assisting the Masons in getting this $10 million project to the finish line. It includes historic tax credits, obviously, and I've given you a little bit of an idea of the qualified expenditure. New markets tax credit allocations are important as well. We're working with the Fulton County Development Authority. We're the Prince Hall Masonic Lodge and I share fundraisers. Cox Curry is a strong friend of this neighborhood, and in addition to assisting this Main Street program, help bring commercial activity back and tourist activity back through placemaking. They're also very strongly believe that iconic structures like this need to continue to have a voice in the neighborhood. And so, you know, you can see just how layered and how nuanced and how complicated this raise ends up looking. And we're not quite there yet. So for those of you who may have deep pockets that are on this call, feel free to reach out to me. And I'd love to give you a tour. I'd love to have you meet a couple of the Masons who are helping with this revitalization effort. And of course, I'm free to answer any difficult questions at the end of this. But I wanted you to get a little bit of view of you know, some of the dirty work we do on a building by building basis to reimagine, as I said from the very beginning, getting these buildings back online. Another sort of hybrid mixed historic and new build construction project is HCDC's Front Porch. So the Historic District Development Corporation is a CDC that's been around since 1980. It was co-founded by lots of luminaries in the neighborhood, not the least of which was Coretta Scott King, to endeavor to take title to property and continue to revitalize this community, along the tone and tenor that the stakeholders, like I said, which is very egalitarian, which is very, we want to bring as diverse group of folks back into this neighborhood as possible from an income perspective, from a culture perspective. And again, that always just makes it harder to do the deal. So what you'll see above is a vacant lot and a soon to be demolished bad fish fry place to be replaced by new residences and a little under 30,000 square feet of new retail. And I can't tell if you can see, but this building here is the historic Hagerbrooks Funeral Home that I referenced from Geneva Hagerbrooks in the art that we saw earlier in the presentation. That's being preserved, and it's turned into, it's already currently operating as an event space and has a current gallery showing, if for those of you who are in town and would love to see, it's beautiful from a West African artist. These historic 6 storefronts, small footprint 6 storefronts, I don't think one of them is more than 700 square feet, will be retained and cantilevered over additional residences. So again, we're faithfully restoring this neighborhood, bringing back new folks, keeping our old historic storefronts, and trying to enhance new entrepreneurship in the neighborhood. I'll give you a little bit different sort of aerial view of what this looks like. For those who want more information about it, either I can give it to you, or you can Google this. You can Google this project, and it'll give you a link to the Invest Atlanta. This is already a recipient of an Invest Atlanta TAD grant, an Ascension grant, and it'll give you this detail with a little bit better narrative. But you can see the size, scale, and scope. It's a massive project, and because of who HTDC is as a nonprofit housing developer in the neighborhood, I wanted you to see the challenge around their hope of having co-living space and family style space and market rate units mixed with affordable units, at a very at 6% AMI, but also 80 and higher, to again have that mix, as I mentioned to you, of as many diverse groups and types of folks in one living space as possible, and to be a good response to one of my complaints. I told a friend a few years back that I couldn't understand it. How come my 2 baristas at my coffee shop in the neighborhood had to drive in both of them drove in from Marietta to work at my coffee shop because they couldn't afford to live in the old 4th Ward. I thought it was absurd. And I've got landowning stakeholders who are interested in helping me, ameliorate that ill. So, again, new markets tax credits, TAD grant, equity, which, by the way, guys, that has more to do with held land for more than 20 years and also grant accumulation to help fill this gap. These aren't necessarily checks that HTC is writing, and then the construction debt, of course. But again, we can have a deeper conversation about all this later. Speaking of which, I wanted to leave some time for you guys to ask as many questions as possible. So Ben, they can have me for as long as they want. And I can go back to any of the slides you want to see.
Great, thank you so much.
No worries.
Yeah, so we'll open it up. You guys are just doing just a ton of work, and I really appreciate you participating, because I think the work that you're doing spans every aspect of preservation, and every aspect of a Main Street program, where you're, like you said, one morning you might be helping to scrub graffiti off of a empty building, and then you're also meeting maybe in the afternoon with developers and looking at financing projects. So I think one takeaway that I have from both of these presentations is that preservation is patience, and the steps aren't always linear, and they aren't always quick. But if you have patience, you can see a project from one end to, you can see an ownership issue from one end to the other, and then hopefully see a project from one end to the other. So we'll
Right.
open it up for questions. Let's see. Is Edgewood Avenue within your district?
It
Or you-
is indeed.
Okay, so it's not specifically just the corridor of Auburn.
No, it's I should have put a map. Oh, guys, I apologize. So think it, for those of you who know the east side of downtown Atlanta, our service area, because it fits two census tracts, it makes it easier for us to report out, is east of Cortland, the north face, I'm sorry, the southern facing facade of Edgewood, west of the Beltline, and south of Freedom Parkway.
All right. How has your organization strategized around gaining site control for key properties? And I know that your specific organization isn't necessarily taking ownership,
We
but
do not take title, correct?
I assume you work potentially with other entities that may want to purchase property, or are you primarily only working with long-term owners in the district?
I'll say it like this. Our legacy institutional owners are not ones to typically trade property. It is the most important thing for my Wheat Streets and my Ebenezer's and my Big Bethels and Butler Street CDCs and HDDC, First Church. They very much believe that their stewardship of this land and their stewardship of the legacy of what the history of the Sweet Auburn community is, it sort of lies with them. And so my job for the institutional owners is to ensure that they have the resources, and you saw with the technical assistance fund, the skill sets they need to redevelop on their terms. I'll say it again, their version of highest and best use is not well articulated in the broader community. And so we try and sort of bridge that communication gap and make sure they have the empathetic development community and capital they need to grow. Now, again, I said that was just, it's probably just say 60% of the neighborhood. The rest of it is around acculturing people who do want to import new capital into the neighborhood, around sort of who their neighbors are and what our expectations are, and having them navigate through the UDC. You got to imagine, man, we're our massing looks different. Our facades look different. You can only go so high in certain places, and our design committee continues to be chaired by Karen Hubner, who is the predecessor to Doug. Well, Doug's now changed roles, but at the UDC, and we try and give very thoughtful assistance to those who would want to take title to property here and redevelop, to help them ensure they fit comfortably into the neighborhood and can benefit from being next to the Beltline, on this side of downtown, and the resurgence of all the traffic that we get along Edgewood, for better or for worse, but just how to make sure all those pieces fit together for the benefit of the growth of the neighborhood.
All right, we've got another question that's actually probably going to fit better after Mark and my presentation. So
Okay.
Jean, we will stick a pin in that question and talk about it. If Mark and I don't answer your question in our next presentation, we'll come back to that one. I had a question. Particularly about your design assistance and the sort of the funding streams you have. Obviously, as you've mentioned, for better or worse, or better and worse, you're in downtown, you're in a very dynamic downtown area that has seen some revitalization and which has allowed those TAD funding programs generally to work as designed. Do you think that that model is replicable on a smaller scale? in a small town Main Street program?
Yeah, this work, Ben, I think you know this. This work is only as easy as your capital is empathetic and your owners are empathetic. And I will tell you, I will back up and say that at the incipiency of this organization, in 2012, and Tamanika Youngblood, who was the original founder, ensured that the landowning stakeholders, the institutions, the business owners, all tracked to a certain vision for what we wanted. It starts with the kernel of a vision that everyone can get behind and get around, and ensure we all kind of know where we're headed, so we can all build in that direction, and we can all sort of accumulate resources to fit that vision. When I think about the success of the neighborhood, I tell folks that, I've got, $500 million worth of permanent debt opportunity for the corridor, for the district, not necessarily just one project at a time. So with that said, when you scale down to a smaller community, let's say if you're still in in-town Atlanta, if you scale down to a smaller in-town community neighborhood, or if you scale down to a smaller city, your attempt is to work comfortably with your municipality, your development authority, your county funding sources, private philanthropic capital, and the private capital that comes from private investment who believes in the vision that you guys are coalescing. And the scale, in my opinion, does not keep you from having to have those key figures in place to begin to help move your vision forward. But it starts with a vision, and then coalescing those entities around believing in your vision, and then creating bespoke. And by the way, guys, this is super important. There's no blueprint for this. You have to solve the problems that you have, right? So you will have a team of people who support that vision, and you'll begin to create bespoke products, bespoke solutions. If you've got old facades, you'll figure out a way to deal with it. If you've got underinvested retail interiors, you'll figure out a way to do that. If you've got a municipality that doesn't fully help fund, historic preservation and deferred maintenance, then you'll figure out a way with that. So that's my answer to that, Ben. There's a formula to ensuring that you've got a consensus and the right team, and then you work at it one building at a time in your Main Street, one square at a time. Let's just say you have a downtown square like Tuskegee in Alabama. I'd love to be a part of the team to sort of work on that one building, one parcel at a time to bring that back to life.
And then I just wanted to also give you an opportunity to plug your upcoming hands.
Oh, geez. Oh, right. Okay. Well, we'll do two things.
Symposium.
That's very kind of you. So this conversation, like I told you guys before, well, I'll give you a little bit more background. So you can probably tell this is not my professional background. What I have done in assisting this neighborhood with our assets and finding resources, that I've just stopped and listened and learned and called friends nationally and spoke to friends locally and asked them how in the world we can wrap our hands around some of these challenges and move them forward. And in doing that, it dawned on me that there wasn't really a place to do that. So there's no place for those of us who are practitioners in preserving African American neighborhoods and districts to all go to once a year and chop it up and share thoughts and ideas and tell everybody how bad the city was at helping us out, or our development authority or whatever, just all the confetching that you normally do. And we went to the National Trust and told them that we thought that was a good idea and that they should do it. And no good deed goes unpunished. We ended up writing a grant to the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, and now we have started an annual conference that supports those practitioners of these districts, and it's called HANDS with 2 A's, Historic African American Neighborhoods and Districts Summit. And last year, during the centennial of the Greenwood Massacre, we launched our first virtual conference, obviously because of the pandemic. And this year, if everything goes well, we'll have our first actual in-person one here in Atlanta, here in Sweet Auburn, based at the Auburn Avenue Research Library. And we're gonna get, guys, this isn't a big industry. We'll probably get folks from 30 or 40 communities around the country to come down here. If I have 100 people, I would be ecstatic. But the idea is that those of us who really take this seriously and who really want to preserve Black heritage in space and preserve African American cultural heritage, narrative and physical edifice, we all just want to share thoughts and ideas and share expertise. And in the same way, I'll never forget the first time I went to Main Street now, and it was so wonderful to see so many people who had the same hard job that I did, but we all had smiles on our faces and knew we enjoyed doing this hard work. I feel it's going to be the same way for those of us who endeavor to do this work in African American cultural heritage districts. So that's August 11th and 12th this year. At the Auburn Avenue Research Library. Like I said, imagine 30 communities from all over the country who do this work and who are touring and seeing kind of the work we do here in Atlanta, but then sharing also practices from all over the country. So it'll be a lot of fun. Oh, and if you want to reach it, it's we have a light landing page up called at hands.org. So HAANDS.org. And we'd love to have you. It's a costless conference, by the way, so feel free to just drop in.
All right, that's all we've got for questions right now. So thank you so much, LeJuano, for sharing all of the work you are doing in downtown Atlanta. And I'm looking forward to that HANDS conference, so I think it'll be great.
I appreciate it.
And
thank you, guys.
We will transition to Mark and I. So I will hand it over to you, Mark, as I get the slides up.
Thank you so much, LeJuano, and to Delene and Tiffany for your excellent presentations. So I just want to riff off of what each of y'all have said about the importance of ownership. I find in working in preservation, sometimes we hesitate to actually reach out to the owners of historic buildings who are neglecting them because it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. But, I think we succeed more often when we deal with the owners and if we have ownership. So this is really what Ben and I are going to talk about right now is how to get ownership, how to use the power of ownership, and how to use options, which is a form of pre-ownership of historic buildings. So I'm going to talk about revolving funds, and then Ben is going to talk about the easements and economic incentives. And of course, easements are a key part of the revolving fund. So next slide, please. So the trust several years ago, and we're still working in this area, acquired this great historic building up on the west side on Harwell Street. And we acquired this by a bargain sale from a family. And it turned out that it had ownership problems. There were wills that had not been probated, even though the ownership was clear, but we couldn't get title because the wills hadn't been probated. So we had a board member who helped us with getting this title cleared up. And we acquired ownership of this building and a building nearby on Washington Street. And I'm sorry, on Washington Park, on Mosley Place, from the Johnson family. It's a heir, 3 ladies who were the daughters of Edward Johnson, who was the first licensed African-American electrician in the city, worked on a lot of important buildings across the city. And he built this house for his family. It was designed by Georgia's first licensed African-American architect. And so we took this to full rehab after we got ownership, and we used our revolving fund to completely rehabilitate this building and the other building on Mosley Place. And we're able to sell them through the Atlanta Land Trust for exactly what we had invested in them, which was great. We didn't lose any money. We didn't make any money, but we accomplished our mission of saving two really nice buildings and put moderate income people in them. So using the revolving fund. So I think we've got a next slide, which just shows how the revolving fund works. So the revolving fund really is more of a program than it is a sum of money. It's nice to have a sum of money, and we're fortunate to have a nice padded revolving fund of money at the Georgia Trust that we've built up through the years by successfully marketing and selling historic buildings. But we're going to start at the top of the slide. I don't know if y'all can see my cursor on it, but the revolving fund, there's Ben's cursor, good. There's the fund of money. So what we do when we see an endangered historic building, one comes to our attention, is that we will either purchase that building outright or we will take an option on the building. Now, just take a moment to describe what an option is. An option is a legal arrangement where the Georgia Trust or any organization or person can buy for a sum of money a right to purchase a building. It's not obligatory. We don't have to purchase it, but we have, because we've paid a sum of money, the owner of the building has to sell the building to us if we exercise our option to buy it. So this is a way of controlling the title of the building for a certain term of time. We usually get a 6-month option to purchase a building. We pay for that option, and we have the right in any time within 6 months to buy the building. Well, so what we will do is then market that building. You see the bottom of the slide. We'll market it through our website, through our publication. Sometimes we run ads in other publications to try to sell that building to a preservation-minded buyer. So someone who has the intention to preserve the building, who submits to us a rehabilitation plan that we know is going to be fulfilled or has a reasonable opportunity to be fulfilled anyway. And then we negotiate an easement that we'll place on the building and a rehabilitation agreement, which says that our buyer will in fact rehabilitate the building according to the Secretary of the Interior standards, which are the sort of the baseline in our preservation field for how buildings and places shall be treated. And we will negotiate that easement. We will go to closing, and we will place that easement and rehabilitation building on the building when we sell the building. And in the case we have an option rather than outright ownership, we will exercise our option. We will literally buy that building from the old owner, and then immediately, I'm talking 5 minutes afterward, have our new buyer come into the closing attorney's office, and we will then sell it to that buyer and place those easements and rehabilitation agreements on the building. And then we will return the money back to the fund. So the fund is self-replenishing. So we, in theory, make a small amount of money, say 5 to 10%, sometimes more if we get very lucky. And we will put the money back in the fund, and that way we can go to another building and save another building through the revolving fund. So this is a technique that was pioneered in Charleston, South Carolina by Historic Charleston Foundation. It was, I think, perfected in Savannah, which has one of the most active revolving funds in the country for a city. I think over 400 buildings have now either gone through easement or a revolving fund through the Historic Savannah's very, very successful revolving fund going back to 1959. So next slide, please. We'll talk about some others. So this was one of our really great preservation saves in the town of Forsyth, Georgia. This house and two others had been purchased by Walmart Corporation as a required buffer strip to a Walmart supercenter in a historic district in the town of Forsyth. We found out about this through an active preservationist in that city, and we contacted Walmart and we told them that we opposed the demolition of these buildings, and we had a proposal for them, and that was that they should give the buildings to us plus $50,000 of cash for us to take on the responsibility of maintaining the buffer strip. And to our surprise, after about 30 or 60 days, Walmart came back to us and accepted our offer because it really relieved them of the responsibility of owning this 100-foot buffer strip in perpetuity. And they could basically delegate that responsibility to the Georgia Trust, and we would then delegate it to our buyers when we sold the buildings. Well, eventually we sold all three of the buildings. That's a before and after picture. The Miller Cottage, this is a small railroad cottage in that strip. There were two other buildings. I'm not sure we have slides of those, but we'll go to the next one. Those are our buyers. This is Purcell Kelly and his wife, Veronica. Purcell was a professor at Duke University. His wife, Veronica, was from Forsyth. Her father was the very first African-American city councilman after African-Americans gained the right to vote there in Forsyth. And so they were coming home in a way, and they ended up purchasing all three of those properties from us and doing a remarkable job rehabilitating them. And so this was a great win for the city of Forsyth, for the trust. And because the buildings were donated to us, all of the money that we made on the sale went back into the revolving fund and actually added a good bit of capital to the revolving fund. So really, it's a great example of the revolving fund's ability to save buildings, to save community, and to attract new people to town. So this is the Johnson House that we started off with. This is a before picture, right as we took title to it. That's Ben's truck in the driveway. This is a picture basically after the building was rehabilitated. We took it back almost exactly like it was when it was built, with the exception of the front door, which had been replaced. We've found a ranch house style door to put on the building. And this is right on the belt line, by the way. So to the right of this picture is the belt line on the west side. Another building that we're very, very proud to have played a role in is the Eleanor Roosevelt School, which was the last Rosenwald school in America constructed. And it was actually constructed after the Rosenwald Fund had shut its coffers and stopped building schools in communities across the South. But Franklin Delano Roosevelt himself wrote Mr. Rosenwald and asked him to build a building in Warm Springs, and gave $1,000 of his own money toward the construction of the building. And it's one of the nicer Rosenwald schools, because as you can see, it's made of brick. A lot of Rosenwald schools were made of wood, and that's why so many of them are missing, is that as they fell into hard times after the integration of schools, they were deteriorated and were torn down. But this one was maintained in actually really great condition. I think we've got a slide of it when we purchased it. This is a building. The windows had been bricked up, and it had actually been turned into a carpet warehouse. It's on the periphery of the city of Warm Springs. We were able to sell the building to DeBron and Von Cher Walker. I think Von Cher is on the call, and there's a picture of her and her brother, DeBron. The second from the right is DeBron, and she's second from the left, I'm sorry, is DeBron, and that's Von Cher. And these are some representatives from the community, but also from Senator Raphael Warnock's office, who are looking very seriously, we hope, at making a grant to make the restoration of this building possible. And there you see behind DeBron and Von Cher is the plaque that says the Eleanor Roosevelt School for 1936. So the revolving fund really made the acquisition of this property successful. It was owned by this person who's using it as a carpet warehouse. They were not making improvements. They were willing to sell to us, which was great. We had an option to buy it. We did not, as I described before, we did not close until we had a buyer. And I think we netted about $1,000 on the sale of this building, which of course did not cover our administrative costs, but it was hugely important to save this last of the Rosenwald schools. And we're very optimistic that under the guidance of LeJuano von Scher, it's going to be saved in perpetuity. So here's just a very last slide that just shows the effectiveness of the revolving fund, what it can do, how much power it has to save historic buildings across our state. See at the very bottom, it shows that. Well, let's talk about how it describes our acquisition. You see, the very first one says that we purchased the Terrell Stone House in Sparta, Georgia. It was built in 1820, in 1991 for $50,000, and we sold it for $48,000. So we lost $2,000 on that property, but we saved a very important building dating from the very, very early part of the settlement in that part of the state of Georgia. But looking down the list, you see that we have now actually acquired 49 buildings through the revolving fund and sold 49 buildings. We invested a total of $2,713,964 in the acquisition of those buildings, and we have sold them for $4,126,300. So we have made a very healthy profit, and that profit, most of which is still in our revolving fund. We have been able, of course, to support our staff, our revolving fund staff who works this fund, who shows the buildings, who supervises their rehabilitation, and very importantly, monitors the easements that we put on the building. So as I stated before, and as Ben's going to get into a little bit more detail about, we at the trust place a conservation easement on every building that we sell through the revolving fund. And these easements require these buildings to be maintained properly in perpetuity. And each year we go out and inspect every one of these buildings to make sure that they're not being allowed to deteriorate. And if they show any sign of that, we write the owners a letter and tell them exactly what they need to do to bring the building into compliance. And if necessary, and we have done this in the past, it's never pleasant to do, we have the right to take them to court to require them to maintain the buildings, or if necessary, to actually take back the title of the building and take it back into the revolving fund and sell it again. And we've unfortunately had to do that on just a few of the buildings of the 49 that we have sold through the revolving fund. But it's a very important remedy to have to maintain that ownership. So getting back to what all of our speakers have said today, is that ownership is the ultimate way to control the fate of a historic building. And we maintain that right to re-enter the properties and take title again in order to make sure that properties that we feel are historic, that we have sold through the fund, are maintained in perpetuity. So I think Ben is going to take over now and talk about our easement program and the way the easements interplay with the revolving fund.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Just to tie that up, the revolving fund is just a really effective tool when it can be used, and it allows us as a sort of a third party or separate entity to come in and approach a property owner with an effective alternative to either demolition or just neglect, as we referenced earlier, sort of the quote unquote abandoned property. So it's an opportunity that a lot of people aren't aware of. And if you're in a community, you may not have the ownership of that property, but you know of a significant historic resource that you'd like to see saved, you could, even if you are not the owner, you can reach out to us, and if it's appropriate, we can engage and try to utilize that tool as a preservation strategy. So as Mark mentioned, every property that we sell through the revolving fund gets a easement placed on it. We also accept donated easements, and an easement is, in its most simplest form, is another sort of real estate jargon word, along with liens and sort of other things that we've referenced today. But an easement in its simplest form is a non-ownership property right. So most people are familiar with it, perhaps with the power company having an easement across somebody's private land so that they can string up power lines or access a pole. Sometimes easements share driveways between two properties. So it's the same idea. It's just that a conservation easement that's donated to our organization gives our nonprofit an ownership right to make sure that the historic building is preserved. Generally, we focus on the exterior of a building, but occasionally, if there's significant architecture on the inside, we can hold easements on the interior as well. But generally speaking, our easement goal is not dissimilar to what a local historic district would be, in that we want to maintain that historic character for the general public to appreciate from the right of way. So just some really great examples that we are proud of in the recent history of the Georgia Trust. We have taken an easement on the historic West Hunter Street Baptist Church in Atlanta. This is a before photograph. Some of you may be familiar with the National Park Service's recent African American and Civil Rights Grant Program, which has been a tremendously effective program trying to preserve landmark buildings throughout the United States. Obviously, Georgia and Atlanta has more than its fair share of those significant landmark buildings. This is one of them. This was the church of Ralph David Abernathy, who was Martin Luther King Jr.'s closest confidant. He was the minister here, and this was, among countless training sessions and planning sessions and worship services, was also the site where the call was given to the folks, the marchers in Selma, to begin their march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So a really, really significant site in the civil rights movement of the 20th century. It has been a multiple recipient of a National Park Service grant, and the Park Service, wanting to ensure that our taxpayer funds are used appropriately and go towards the long-term preservation, require that an easement be donated on all of these projects. So there you see recognition of the grants and the folks that are working on the project. I'm happy to report that they are close to completion here, and that we now hold a perpetual easement on this building, so it will be preserved in perpetuity. There you see the commissioned and preserved stained glass and painted glass windows. So that is an Annette Abernathy, who is one generation removed from Ralph David Abernathy, who is overseeing this this project and has been instrumental in writing the grants and convincing the Park Service that this is a worthy project. So we're excited to see this one come to an end in terms of construction, but just beginning the process of being a landmark that is revitalized on the west side of Atlanta. Just down the street, another really significant building. This is a National Historic Landmark. This is Fountain Hall on the campus now of Morris Brown College, which just received its full accreditation after 20 years, after losing it 20 years ago. So a shout out to them. They are not only revitalizing their academic side, they are revitalizing this really significant building, one of the earliest buildings in the historic African-American college campuses on the west side of Atlanta. W.E.B. Du Bois had an office here and was a significant academic in the early 20th century. So just really, really significant American history in this corridor that the Park Service has recognized, and that the Georgia Trust is excited to play a part in helping to preserve and protect through our easement program. There you can see a restored clock tower and new roof, and they are in the midst of a very significant rehabilitation and fundraising project so that they can get this building back into use. And in that same program down in Americus, the Americus Colored Hospital, which is not quite as remarkable in terms of the architecture compared to those other two, but obviously very significant. And in a part of Georgia and in the Southeast where a lot of folks may not necessarily think of the civil rights movement, but this hospital was home to African-American doctors and dentists and nurses, and was outside of any major city in the South, probably the primary training center for young doctors and dentists during the Jim Crow era, when they were not able to train or practice in a lot of the American South. And it is just now underway with its first phase of a rehabilitation, but we are excited for this one as well. And again, we now have a permanent protection on this property so that it will be, no matter how long it takes, it will be protected and preserved. And we are excited to see that back into use. So our easement program is not simply tied to these landmark buildings or grant recipients. We can accept easements on any historic property in the state of Georgia. So this is another great example. This is in the old 4th Ward of Atlanta. Back in the 1980s, a private owner redeveloped this really quaint little folk Victorian duplex, double shotgun house, and wanted to make sure it was preserved, and donated an easement to our organization 30 years before any of us who are working here now even worked at the organization. So this is a great example of sort of the diversity of our resources that we protect through our easement program. It is not simply commercial buildings, it's not simply residential. We will consider an easement on any property. And the revolving fund and the easement program, although they essentially end up with the same protections on the property, do fit sort of two different opportunities or depending on where you are coming from. If you are owner of a historic property, or your family is the owner of a historic property, they can achieve the same outcome, but they really don't necessarily start from the same place. So as Mark mentioned, in the revolving fund scenario, we actually take title and the Georgia Trust becomes an owner, at least for a short period of time, so that while we are in that chain of title, we can put those protections in place. The easement program makes a lot more sense for folks who may have a long-term ownership stake or a family, stable family ownership, and the building has been maintained and is not distressed. That revolving fund works really well for endangered properties, whereas our easement program really recognizes properties that have been well maintained. A generation or a single owner may determine that they want to make sure that the building is preserved beyond their lifetime, at which point those easement donations may make more sense for that, because we don't take title through an easement donation. We simply are granted those ownership rights so that we can make sure that the building is preserved and maintained over time. So again, we'd love to get into the weeds with this on y'all. It doesn't make sense in this workshop particularly, but if these programs work out or make sense for you to help preserve your historic buildings, we're always happy to have a talk. And then LeJuano touched on this a fair amount in his talk, but I wanted to sort of bring it full circle. Georgia is really fortunate that we have a lot of economic incentives for folks to take on sometimes challenging, oftentimes challenging rehabilitation projects that are within historic districts or listed in the National Register. And we haven't really talked about the National Register much in this particular workshop, but essentially it is a formal list maintained and overseen by the National Park Service of properties and sites that are worthy of preservation in the United States. So they can reflect lots of numbers, any number of types of history, types of architecture. That can be a workshop in and of itself, so we won't get into it there, other than to say that what I'm about to talk about, in order to take advantage of them, the property does need to be listed in the National Register, either individually listed or within an existing district that it contributes to. So there are 3 opportunities for tax incentives. And again, this is for property that you have ownership of and that you are able to make an investment in. A certified, this is what requires a certified rehabilitation. So it's not simply going to Home Depot and fixing up, you know, odds and ends here and there. It really does need to be a step-by-step process, and it is reviewed by the Georgia Historic Preservation Division. So not Melissa Jest herself, but that same division has a tax incentives and grants office that manages these programs. But I did want to just introduce them to y'all in case you hadn't been made aware of them before. So there is a federal credit of 20%, and that can come back on the qualified expenditures of a rehab project. That is specifically at the federal level for income producing properties. There's a Georgia state credit at 25% of those qualified expenditures. And the state credit can actually be used on private homes. It does not have to be an income producing property. There are limits to that state credit, however, but I'll go into a generic case study here in a minute. And then one really unique tool or benefit that Georgia has that I'm not sure other states have is the preferential property tax assessment. So if you are undertaking a certified rehabilitation of your historic home or historic building, and you're taking advantage of those tax credits, you can also take advantage of this property tax freeze, where the property taxes of your building are frozen at the pre-rehab assessment for 8.5 years. So that can, you know, if you think about a building that needs a really significant amount of investment, obviously the assessment on one after a major investment is going to be much higher than before. So enabling that 8-year freeze to help you sort of rebuild your coffers can really play a positive part in your willingness to take on that investment. Let's see, okay. So as an example, this is 220 Sunset in West Atlanta. This was the home of Maynard Jackson's father. So Maynard Jackson was the first African-American mayor of Atlanta, very significant figure in the city's history, sort of a larger than life figure. And he did live here for some time during the 1950s. Relatively nondescript building, but is actually a quadplex. So there are 4 apartments in this building. And this is to show that on Sunset Avenue, here is 220 Sunset. Next door was Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King's family house in the 1960s. So during his adult life, when they were raising a family, and at the time of his assassination. So really significant history on this corridor of Sunset in West Atlanta. This building, 220 Sunset, remained had rentals in it all the way up through the 1990s. At one point, during the creation of the King Center, their offices were actually located in this building. And up until about 2 years ago, the building was owned by the King Center, and unfortunately had been left to its own devices and was in pretty bad shape, and was getting to the point where it looked like there was going to be a demolition. Local preservation advocates stepped in, tried to argue that it was worthy of preservation, and actually convinced the King Center not to tear it down and to partner with a local nonprofit who purchased it and is working with a private developer to rehabilitate the property. So as a case study, and again, these are fictionalized numbers. Please just forgive me, I was trying to make the math easy. But just thinking through how these incentives would work on a particular project like this. So that was purchased for $200,000 in 2019 by the West Side Future Fund. They are working with a private developer who has created an LLC, which allows for these tax credits to be utilized. And let's just assume that the rehab of these, the building's in really bad shape. It's going to need an entire new roof, all new systems, architectural drawings and things like that. Let's assume rehab costs of $1 million. So obviously significant investment required on the front end. But if you go through the process and this project is certified as an appropriate rehabilitation that follows all of the Secretary of Interior standards, and again becomes rental apartment units, you then qualify for 20% of that $1 million back as a federal tax credit. So that's your acquisition cost already back as a tax credit. And then at the state level, you've got 25% of that $1 million coming back. And that's $250,000. So you're almost at half of your rehab investment coming back in the form of tax credits. Now, obviously, there aren't many of us that are going to be able to claim $450,000 of tax credits on our income. Not even a wealthy developer is usually going to be able to swing that. So what LeJuano touched on, and what happens a lot, is that these tax credits get syndicated or shared on a secondary market with folks who aren't necessarily directly involved with the rehab of this project, but are interested in the tax credits. So the credits that this project can earn can be shared or sold on a secondary market, which brings direct funding into the project. So let's assume 80 cents on the dollar, that's nearly $400,000 of that $1 million rehab cost that can be brought into the project thanks to these tax credits. So it gets complicated fast, but if you are an owner of a project, again, I used big round numbers to make it easy, but there are homes in Georgia that have utilized this program for in the last couple of years for as low as $8,000 of a tax credit. Everybody can use it. If you're going to be rehabbing that house anyway, if you want to follow the rules and it's a historic home, anybody could use a $8,000 credit. So it doesn't have to be these big numbers, but it's a really effective tool that can be utilized to bring some money into a project that may not make sense otherwise. And then, of course, you've got that preferential tax assessment. So using 220 Sunset as an example, in 2021, before the rehab had started, it's assessed at $102,000. So at the end of that $1 million project, you've got 4 folks living in and renting out an apartment in that historic building. It's obviously in much better condition, but you don't have to worry about paying larger property taxes until 2029. So it's really, really effective. And again, all 3 of these programs are available to any historic property in the entire state of Georgia. So it doesn't matter county to county. It is a statewide program. So, and then another thing to just touch on, they're not exclusive. You can have a property that has an easement on it and still utilize these tax credits. So we've been excited to follow this one. We'll be excited to see that. I think they are starting their construction later this summer. But just another good example of historic preservation of an African-American resource that is using some of those tools available. And that is what I've got. It looks like we're right on time, and I would be happy to take any questions, and Mark as well.
So Ben, we do have a question.
Yes.
It's focusing on a road next to the Red Hill Cemetery. But really the question is whether the trust can take an easement or hold an easement on state land. And in this particular instance, whether we could have that protection over a historic road, if that's state-owned land.
So an easement requires a donation from the property owner, which obviously requires their willingness to grant the easement. So Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not familiar with any easements that the state is not usually in the business of giving up or granting those types of easements, but I assume it would be possible.
Right, there's no impediment to us holding an easement on a piece of publicly owned property, whether state, municipality, or county. But I don't know of any, even in the whole United States, where a county or state has placed an easement on a property. I could be wrong. It's just unlikely that a governmental entity would want to be subservient to a nonprofit organization.
And going back to, Ms. Lewis, did you have a question? Yeah. Feel free to unmute yourself there.
Of course. I'm Jean, and I wrote previously for the other discussion. So we have a 150-year-old farmhouse in rural Georgia. We are at the precipice of being declared a historic site very soon. So I can't say any more than that. It is owned by the same family. It has been lived in since 1882. It's in actually a suburban neighborhood, and most of that neighborhood is part of a 250-acre parcel owned by the family that lives in this house. It has 6 rooms since 1888, and a couple of new rooms, which are bathrooms, added in the 2000. What are our options? It looks horrible from the outside. We need to put a new roof on. It just needs to look better in this neighborhood. Inside, it's not that bad. A member of the family has been living in it for 140 years. What are our options? If we land in the historic preservation, which I think we will, first thing we need to do is put on a roof. After that, we need to just make it look nicer in this neighborhood of nice homes. What are our options here? And I was recommended to come here by the by the Historic Trust. They said this might be helpful.
Great. Well, once it is listed in the National Register, again, it can just be a part of a larger district. Those tax incentives are eligible, and if you've owned it for that long,
Yeah.
there's not to get too far in the weeds, but there's a substantial rehabilitation test that sort of a threshold amount of money that needs to be spent to make you eligible.
Okay.
But if you're looking at a new roof and restoring wood siding and windows and things like that, you might be getting to that threshold. So it would certainly be worth reaching out to the state preservation office, and we're happy to connect you there to sort of maybe pencil out whether or not those tax credits might work. But again, those incentives are on the back end of a project, right? For privately owned property, there are rarely funding sources available to get a project started. So it can make those incentives, those incentives can make it worthwhile, but the funding still needs to come up front from typically from the property owner.
Okay, I just had a question about, you mentioned something about the easement.
Mhm.
Is that something the family might consider? They don't want to sell, and they've been
So-
holding this.
So it's worth consideration. It's not always the right answer or the right call, but if everyone in the ownership or in the family is committed to its preservation, it is a way to ensure preservation. It also does not provide any funding. You are committing yourselves to long-term maintenance and protection. But if the property ever changed hands or was sold out of the family, you would be assured that its historic character would be protected through our organization.
Great, thank you.
And Miss Lewis, I would just add, as you're starting this process, making sure that the person whose name is on the title
Mhm.
is alive, that's key, because you can't put subsidies into a property that's heirs property.
Okay, at the moment, they are young people in their 40s, but it's a huge
And it's-
family. But the
Yeah,
deed,
and is in their names.
yes.
Okay, so
Thank you.
definitely consider some estate planning too, to make sure that all the work you put in doesn't erode.
That's what we're hoping. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just want to add that an easement is a really great way of ensuring that descendants of a family-owned historic site are bound to keep up the property and continue that legacy of care. So
Okay,
an easement may be a good option if you're at all concerned about the property not being neglected in the future.
well, it's very interesting to have held on to the house and to be able to account for a couple of 100 acres.
It's very, very, very rare that happens. You're exactly right.
Right, so now we've come down to today,
Right.
and it's like, a whole different way of looking at old homes with the two owners. We have to continue to tell them to value this property that they have.
That's correct.
And I'm not saying this is fits your situation, but we have actually had recent success with our revolving fund. I mentioned earlier, it's typically
Yes,
it's sort of endangered properties, but we've actually had a lot of recent success with similar property that has been in a single family or under single ownership for many generations or 50 to 100 years, where the current owners recognize that the next generation is not going to take on the responsibilities,
Right.
and have approached us with the understanding that we would not be long-term owners, but we would put those protections in place, and then we help them sell to new owners outside of their family, but they can be assured that those that easement protection is on the deed forever, and so that their family's legacy carries on, even though
Yes.
the generations of their family aren't direct owners.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great
Yeah.
question.
Thank you. We get reviewed in a few weeks, then we'll know. Thank you.
Well, good luck. Seeing no other questions and recognizing that we are 2 minutes over time, I just want to say thank you to everybody for participating today, for attending, and we really appreciate your interest and attention. We do intend to continue these workshops with different themes throughout the year. So up next, be on the lookout for a potential workshop with the National Park Service to help explain some of those grant funding opportunities that I touched on today. So thank you all again.
Thanks
And
to our
look out-
presenters.
Yeah,
They all did a
absolutely.
great job.
Look out for an email from the Georgia Trust following up on this that will have several of those resources listed, contact information for our presenters, and a link to a recording of this workshop. But I hope you all have an excellent rest of your Thursday and get out and enjoy the great weather.